The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 14-year-old Luna Martinez stood at the Family Feud podium with the quiet confidence of someone who had never felt truly alone, even though the source of her comfort and companionship was invisible to everyone around her, existing only in the rich inner world where she maintained a deep and meaningful friendship with Alex, a presence who had been her constant companion, confidant, and source of emotional support for as long as she could remember. When Steve Harvey asked about your closest friend, Luna's response, delivered with the natural honesty of someone who had never learned to be ashamed of the relationship that mattered most to her, would reveal the complex reality of adolescent development when imaginary companions persist far beyond the age when most people expect them to disappear. "Alex," Luna had said simply, her voice carrying the warmth and affection that comes from speaking about someone genuinely beloved, unaware in that moment that her family members were exchanging worried glances, and that her honest answer would reveal to millions of viewers that she maintained an active relationship with an imaginary friend at an age when most teenagers would be embarrassed to admit such a connection.
"Alex understands me better than anyone else does. We talk about everything."
The studio had fallen into an uncomfortable silence as everyone present tried to understand what it meant for a teenager to maintain such an intense relationship with an imaginary companion, and whether this represented a harmless extension of childhood creativity or a concerning delay in normal psychological development that might require professional intervention. Luna Martinez had been talking to Alex since she was 3 years old, when the imaginary friend had first appeared during a period of significant stress and change in her family's life. What had begun as a typical childhood imaginary companion had evolved into a complex, ongoing relationship that had provided Luna with emotional support, intellectual stimulation, and social comfort throughout elementary and middle school years, when many of her peers had long since outgrown their imaginary friends. Alex was not a simple fantasy figure, but a fully developed personality in Luna's mind, complete with distinct opinions, preferences, sense of humor, and emotional responses that sometimes differed from Luna's own thoughts and feelings. Their conversations were sophisticated and wide-ranging, covering topics from school problems and family dynamics to philosophical questions about identity, morality, and the nature of friendship itself. The relationship with Alex had become more important to Luna as she had encountered increasing difficulties with real-world social relationships during her middle school years. While other students had been forming cliques, navigating romantic interests, and developing the complex social skills required for adolescent peer relationships, Luna had found these interactions confusing, superficial, and less satisfying than the deep emotional connection she maintained with Alex. Luna's family had initially been charmed by her vivid imagination and had encouraged her conversations with Alex as a sign of creativity and emotional intelligence, but as Luna had entered her teenage years and had continued to prioritize her relationship with Alex over developing friendships with peers her own age, her parents, Rosa and Miguel Martinez, had become increasingly concerned about her social development and psychological health. The most troubling aspect of Luna's continued relationship with Alex, from her family's perspective, was the way it seemed to be interfering with her ability to form meaningful connections with real people. Luna had little interest in spending time with classmates, rarely accepted social invitations, and seemed to prefer the company of her imaginary friend to the more challenging and unpredictable dynamics of actual teenage friendships. School counselors and teachers had also begun expressing concerns about Luna's social isolation and her tendency to appear distracted during class, as if she were listening to or conversing with someone who wasn't there. While her academic performance remained strong, her social skills seemed to be lagging behind those of her peers, and she often seemed disconnected from the social learning that typically occurs through peer interaction during adolescence. Rosa and Miguel had consulted with child psychologists about Luna's continued relationship with Alex, seeking guidance about whether this represented normal variation in developmental patterns or whether it indicated underlying emotional or psychological issues that required treatment. The professional opinions they had received were mixed, with some experts suggesting that imaginary friends could persist harmlessly into adolescence, while others recommended intervention to encourage Luna to develop more age-appropriate social relationships. The most complex aspect of Luna's situation was that her relationship with Alex genuinely seemed to provide her with emotional benefits that she wasn't finding in real-world relationships. Alex was consistently available, completely accepting, and perfectly attuned to Luna's emotional needs in ways that real friends, with their own personalities and priorities, could never be. From Luna's perspective, Alex was simply the best friend she had ever had, and she couldn't understand why adults seemed to think this was problematic. Luna had become increasingly defensive about her friendship with Alex as she had encountered more criticism and concern from family members and school personnel. She had learned not to mention Alex in certain contexts, but she had refused to abandon the relationship or to pretend that Alex wasn't important to her. This had created ongoing tension within her family and had contributed to her sense that adults didn't understand or appreciate the value of her most meaningful relationship. The psychological functions that Alex served in Luna's life were complex and multifaceted. Alex provided emotional regulation, helping Luna process difficult feelings and experiences through conversation and support. Alex offered intellectual stimulation, engaging with Luna in discussions about ideas and concepts that she found more interesting than typical teenage concerns. Most importantly, Alex provided unconditional acceptance and understanding, serving as a refuge from the judgment and social pressures that Luna experienced in her interactions with peers and adults. From a developmental perspective, Luna's continued relationship with Alex represented both adaptive and potentially problematic elements. On one hand, Alex helped Luna cope with stress, provided emotional support, and stimulated her imagination and creativity. On the other hand, the intensity of her relationship with Alex seemed to be preventing her from developing the social skills and real-world relationships that were important for healthy adolescent development. The social consequences of Luna's relationship with Alex had become increasingly significant as she had progressed through middle school. Peers who might have been potential friends had been put off by her apparent lack of interest in social activities and her tendency to seem distracted or disconnected during group interactions. Teachers had noticed her tendency to appear to be listening to or conversing with someone invisible, which had raised concerns about her mental health and social adjustment. Luna's academic performance had remained strong, suggesting that her relationship with Alex was not interfering with her cognitive development or her ability to function in structured educational environments. However, her participation in group projects, extracurricular activities, and other social aspects of school had been limited, which had concerned educators who understood the importance of peer interaction for healthy adolescent development. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Miguel Martinez, who had hoped that participating in a fun family activity might help Luna engage more naturally with real people and might provide an opportunity for her to experience the satisfaction and enjoyment that could come from successful social interaction with people other than Alex. During the pre-show preparations, Luna had been friendly and cooperative, but she had also appeared to be engaged in occasional brief conversations with someone who wasn't visible to others. The production staff had noticed her tendency to pause as if listening to someone speak, and she had sometimes smiled or responded to what seemed to be internal dialogue rather than external stimuli. The game had been proceeding with Luna participating appropriately and demonstrating quick thinking and good humor that suggested strong intellectual and emotional capabilities. The Martinez family was competing against the Thompson family from Colorado, and while both sides had been playing enthusiastically, there had been something slightly disconnected about Luna's engagement that suggested she was managing multiple conversations simultaneously. But when it came time for the category Your Closest Friend, and it was Luna's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of the relationship that was most important to her, while also revealing the aspect of her life that caused the most concern for her family and social environment. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Luna's dreamy expression and the way she seemed to be attending to more than just the game had made him curious and attentive. "All right, Luna," Steve had said gently. "Your closest friend, who comes to mind?" Luna had answered without hesitation, her voice carrying genuine affection and warmth. "Alex," Luna had said, clearly delighted to have an opportunity to acknowledge publicly the relationship that meant so much to her. "Alex understands me better than anyone else does. We talk about everything." The studio had become quiet as everyone present tried to understand whether Luna was referring to a real person who wasn't present or whether something more complex was happening. Steve had paused, looking around as if he might have missed seeing someone. "Is Alex here with us today?" Steve had asked with gentle curiosity. "Alex is always with me," Luna had replied matter-of-factly, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Alex helps me think through problems and makes me feel better when I'm upset. We've been friends for as long as I can remember." The studio audience had begun to understand that Luna was describing an imaginary friend, and there was a mixture of concern and fascination in their reaction. Steve had looked at Rosa and Miguel Martinez, who were clearly uncomfortable and concerned about their daughter's public revelation of her relationship with Alex. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," Steve had said with obvious compassion, "how do you feel about Luna's friendship with Alex?" "We're worried," Rosa had said honestly. "Luna is 14 years old, and she spends more time talking to Alex than she does with real people. We don't know if this is normal or if we should be concerned." Miguel had nodded, his voice filled with love and confusion. "We want Luna to be happy," Miguel had said, "but we also want her to have real friendships with people her own age. We're not sure if Alex is helping her or preventing her from developing normal social relationships." Steve had looked at Luna with obvious respect for her honesty and curiosity about her experience. "Luna," Steve had said, "can you help me understand what Alex means to you and why this friendship is so important?" "Alex listens to me," Luna had explained with the clear logic of someone who had thought deeply about this relationship. "Alex doesn't judge me or try to change me. When I'm confused about something, Alex helps me figure it out. When I'm sad, Alex makes me feel better. Real people are more complicated and harder to understand." Steve had considered this carefully, recognizing the intelligence and emotional sophistication in Luna's explanation. "Luna," Steve had said, "it sounds like Alex provides you with something very valuable: understanding, support, and acceptance. Those are important things in any friendship, whether the friend is someone others can see or someone who exists in your heart and mind." Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, understanding that this moment required validation of Luna's experience while also acknowledging her family's concerns. "Luna," Steve had said, placing the jacket around her shoulders, "this jacket represents something very important today. It represents the understanding that friendship comes in many forms and that the relationships that help us feel understood and supported are valuable, even when they don't look like what other people expect." Luna had pulled the jacket closer, clearly moved by the recognition and acceptance of her relationship with Alex. Steve had turned to address Luna's family and the studio audience. "What Luna is showing us is that human beings need connection, understanding, and support," Steve had said. "Sometimes we find those things in relationships that others can't see or understand. That doesn't make them less real or less valuable to the person experiencing them." But Steve had also addressed the family's concerns with equal respect. At the same time, Steve had continued, "It's important for young people to learn how to connect with others in the world around them. Luna, your friendship with Alex is precious, but you might also discover that sharing some of that capacity for deep friendship with people who can hug you back could bring you even more joy." The game had resumed with increased understanding and acceptance of Luna's unique perspective on friendship and social connection. When Steve had asked the final question about things that make you feel understood, Luna had answered, "Having someone who accepts all of me, even the parts that others think are strange." The episode aired 4 months later and sparked important conversations about imaginary friends in adolescence, developmental differences, and the various ways that young people find emotional support and social connection. Child psychologists used Luna's story to help families understand that imaginary companions can serve important psychological functions even when they persist beyond typical developmental timelines. Luna had kept Steve's jacket as a symbol of the moment when her most important relationship was acknowledged and respected rather than pathologized or dismissed. More importantly, the experience had helped her family approach her relationship with Alex with greater understanding and had encouraged them to support Luna in gradually expanding her social world while honoring the value of her imaginary friendship. The jacket represented Luna's understanding that different people find connection in different ways, that imagination and internal relationships can be as meaningful as external ones, and that growing up doesn't always mean giving up the sources of comfort and understanding that have sustained you through difficult times. Because that's what friendship looks like when it transcends the boundaries of what others can see or understand. That's what development sounds like when it follows its own timeline rather than societal expectations. And that's what happens when a 14-year-old girl teaches everyone around her that the heart's need for connection can be met in ways that don't always conform to conventional definitions of normal, but that are no less real or valuable for being different. Luna Martinez had maintained an imaginary friendship that others found concerning, but on that day at Family Feud, she showed that some relationships exist in places others can't see, and that the capacity for deep connection and understanding is a gift that shouldn't be diminished simply because it doesn't look like what everyone else expects.